couple of years ago, I responded to a Craigslist ad for a TV. I was in the market for a new one after mine broke, and unfortunately, I hadn't gotten the warranty for it. I searched on Craigslist because I figured that's where the best deals would be. People on Craigslist are generally just trying to get rid of stuff, and will sell it somewhere else if they want more money. That's what I was thinking, so after searching for a while, I found a TV that looked good. It was 55 inches, relatively new, and was a good price. Not so cheap that it looked like a scam, but cheap enough that it was a really good deal. I saw that it was a new listing, and I decided to contact the seller immediately so that nobody else would get it before I had a chance to. The seller responded to me rather quickly, and I asked to look at the TV. I had the money and was prepared to buy it as long as it worked and everything, but my main problem was how I would bring it back to my place. My car was really small, and there was no way I was going to fit it in there. My buddy Danny had a truck that it would fit in, so I texted him and asked him if he would help me out. Meanwhile, I was told that I would be able to see the TV that day at 3 p.m., and I agreed to go see it. My hope was that Danny would be able to possibly meet me there with his truck, but a few minutes later, he wasn't responding to my text. I had to leave, and I drove to the location I was given to. It was about 15 minutes away from where I lived. I got to the neighborhood, which looked pretty average to me. It was a residential area that was a little bit out in the country, but not too much. Most houses were decently spread apart with larger yards and a decent amount of trees around. I arrived at the address and parked on the side of the street in front of it. It was a nice-looking house with a long driveway. They had some nice decorations outside and a garden in the front yard. I texted the seller letting him know that I was there, and he told me to come up to the front door. I got out of my car and walked up the driveway, then knocked on the front door. A man answered and said his name was Dave. Dave had gray hair and a gray goatee. He was maybe in his 50s or 60s. He told me he was selling the TV because his son gave him one, and he just wanted to get rid of this one now because he didn't need it. He then told me that he had some other people interested, so he hoped I would be able to buy it. After I saw the TV sitting in his living room and we turned it on, I told him yes, I would like to buy it, but I wouldn't be able to drive it to my place. I explained how I texted my friend, and then I checked to see if Danny had gotten back to me. He had, but he said he wouldn't be able to help me until tonight. I asked the man if there was any chance he would be able to hold the TV for me just until 8 p.m. when I would be back. I was surprised, but the man agreed, but he said he wouldn't hold it any longer. I left and went back home, and when Danny came by with his truck that night, I texted Dave, the seller, and he said it was fine for me to come and buy the TV now. Danny and I drove back to Dave's place, now at nighttime. When we arrived at the neighborhood and made our way to the address, I got confused. Dave's house looked different. All of the lights were off, the yard decorations were gone, and even the flowers were gone. It looked as though it was a completely different place than a few hours earlier. Danny shut his engine off and had already gotten out of the truck. I got out and told him to wait because it just didn't look right. Danny was confused and asked why as he began to walk up the driveway. I told him how it looked like nobody lived there now, and he did agree that it seemed creepy. I called Dave to let him know that I was there now, but after I called him, there was no answer. I texted him as well, but I couldn't get a response. We got back in the truck and sat in there waiting for about 15 minutes, but I didn't get any responses from Dave. I figured maybe he sold it to somebody else after all or something, and we decided we should just go back home. I was frustrated, and I was also really weirded out by the whole situation. That night, I was awoken in the middle of the night to my phone ringing. I picked it up and saw that Dave was calling me. It was almost 4 a.m. I decided to answer it because I was really curious why he was calling me now. When I picked up, I could hear Dave's voice start to speak, but I couldn't make out anything that he was saying. He then began to laugh like a maniac, and it really gave me the creeps. His laughing got louder and louder, and then he hung up. It took me a while to get back to sleep, but I was so creeped out by the whole situation that the next day I drove all the way back to the neighborhood. I knocked on Dave's door, but nobody answered. The house still looked abandoned, so I went to the neighbor across the street and knocked on his door and asked him if he knew the guy who lived there. He told me that nobody currently lived in that house and hadn't for a couple of weeks. After learning this, I went back to Craigslist and found that the listing had been deleted. I also looked at my phone and tried to call and text Dave again, but my number was now blocked. I'm a young woman, and last fall, I tried to sell my car using Craigslist. I lived by myself in a small house in a pretty typical neighborhood. My car was a 2017 Honda Civic, and I was going to be buying a little bit newer car. I placed the ad on Craigslist and waited to get some responses. The first person to respond was a man named Mike. Mike texted me asking if the car was still for sale and said that he was very interested in it. I told him yes and asked if he would like to come and see it. He told me that he would, and we arranged for him to come over to my house the next day. After we both got off work, the next evening I got home and took the car out of my garage and parked it at the end of the driveway. Mike arrived a little bit later at the agreed time, and I met him at the end of the driveway near the car. Almost immediately, things went horrible. Mike looked at the car for the first minute or so, but then he became a total creep. He started trying to hit on me and made uncomfortable conversation. He no longer seemed interested in the car, but only with me. It got really uncomfortable and really annoying, and I wasn't going to take any more of it, and I told Mike that I wanted him to leave. Mike started to get angry, and he said that he wanted to buy my car and told me I was being rude to him for no reason. After trying to get him to leave me alone for several more minutes, I threatened to call the police. This finally got Mike to leave me alone. He angrily stormed off and got back into his car and drove away. I was really glad that he was gone. He really creeped me out, and something about him just seemed a little bit off. I brought my car back in the garage and went inside. It was later that night when I started receiving texts from him. He asked me if he could see the car again, but then started texting me the same weird and creepy things that he was saying to me in person. After probably 4 or 5 texts from Mike that night, all in the span of about an hour, I blocked his number, and then I replied to 1 or 2 people that were actually interested in my car for sale. I was in my bedroom on my laptop doing this, and it was about 11 p.m. or so. That's when I heard a knock coming from my bedroom window directly to my left. I was startled and looked over to see Mike looking right in my bedroom window at me. He was knocking on the window, and I couldn't make out much in the dark other than I knew it was Mike for sure. I jumped back and literally hid behind the other side of my bed when I saw him. He was now messing around with the window as if he was trying to open it. I yelled loudly that I was calling the police. I heard Mike yell back that he didn't care, and then he disappeared from the window. I took my phone and dialed 911 immediately. I stayed on with the operator while I waited for the police to arrive. I had no idea if Mike had left or where he was until about a minute later when I heard a banging noise now coming from the back side of my house. I couldn't tell exactly where he was, but I wasn't going to go and find out. The police would be there shortly, and I was just hoping that Mike wouldn't get inside of my house. It wasn't a very big house, it was pretty small, and if he got inside, it wouldn't take him long to find me. I heard the banging now move to a different spot, but I still didn't know exactly where he was. It paused for about a minute or two, but then it picked back up again. And then, all of a sudden, I heard the terrifying sound of glass breaking coming from somewhere in the opposite side of my house. I ran and hid inside my closet in the corner of my bedroom. I was hoping that Mike wouldn't be able to get to me. And then, just in time, I heard the sound of a siren coming from right down the street. I remained hidden in the closet and listened to what was going on. I didn't hear much movement from inside the house, but within a minute, I started to hear some yelling coming from the front door. The police had arrived, and I felt much safer. I left my room after an officer came to my door, and I was told that they had caught Mike. One thing I learned from this experience is to never meet with people from Craigslist at your home, and instead choose a public place. However, I have stayed away from Craigslist altogether since, and I sold my car somewhere else. This story took place last fall. At the time, I had just recently moved to a house for college. I was living with 3 different roommates, and none of us had much furniture. We had some things for our own bedrooms, such as desks, chairs, and our beds, but we didn't have couches and things like that. I decided to look on Craigslist for some couches and other chairs we could use in our living room. I didn't have much money to spend, but we still wanted some decent furniture in our house. After searching for about 10 minutes, I was able to find one that looked to be a pretty good couch for us to use. We didn't need or want anything that nice, knowing that we would probably just get rid of it when we all moved out of the house. The couch that I found only costed $50, and after showing it to my roommates, we all agreed to go buy it. I contacted the seller, who was at the other end of town, but said that whenever we wanted to come and buy it, we could. So that night, my roommate Ben and I both went in my car and drove to buy the couch. It took us only about 15 minutes to get there, because like I said, it was all the way at the other end of town. When we arrived at the address, Ben and I got out of the car and walked up to the house. We were in a neighborhood that honestly didn't look the greatest, and in fact seemed a little bit sketchy. It was only about 9 p.m., but nobody else seemed to be out on any of the roads at the time. When we got up to the house, we knocked on the door. It opened up, and a man stood in the doorway. He was very tall and thin, had blondish hair, and asked what we wanted. I told him we were there for the couch. He then asked for $20, which was strange because it was listed at $50 online. I wasn't going to question it though, and I handed him the money. I could see that the couch was already right up against the wall near the front door, and the man then pointed to it as he walked away. Ben and I each grabbed one end of the couch, and then walked out the door and put it into the back of my truck. Then we got in and drove back. I drove, and when we had made it all the way back to our house and gotten onto our street, Ben told me that we were being followed. I had no idea that somebody had been following us, but now that I looked back, there was a car with its headlights on a ways down the street. I said it's probably just a neighbor, but Ben said it had followed us all the way from the neighborhood where we had bought the couch. I parked anyways, right in front of our house. I really wasn't scared of some random person following us for whatever reason, and they weren't getting out of their car, whoever they were. Plus, there was a chance that maybe it was just a neighbor, although those chances seemed pretty slim. The car was at least a good 100 feet back though, and we brought the couch inside and put it into place in our living room. It was then that we noticed out of the front window that the car that had followed us was now idling right in front of our house. We both went to the window and looked. We did have window shades, but they were all the way open at the time, and I'm pretty sure whoever was in the car could see us well. However, we couldn't really see the driver of the car at all. After watching the car for a good minute or so, I decided to go out and see who they were and what they wanted. I opened the door and stepped outside, but the instant I did, the car sped away, screeching its tires and all. I went back inside, and Ben and I tried to figure out what that was all about. But at the end of the day, we didn't know, and they hadn't done anything, so we really didn't care all that much. Over the next few days, things were normal and fine, but then things started to get strange again. One morning, one of my other roommates, Brian, reported seeing a man standing in our backyard sort of near his window. All of our bedrooms were on the second floor, so Brian could see him, but the guy wasn't facing him, so he couldn't identify how he looked. Brian said he thought it was weird, but ultimately just went back to bed. Then, the next night, as we were all watching TV in the living room, the window shades were partially closed, but I noticed what appeared to be two men walking through our front yard. I went over and looked out and saw them go past to the side of the house. After that, they went out of sight, but all of us living there would continue to see random people in the yard or cars driving and stopping in front of the house randomly. This went on for about a week or two, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. After that, none of us ever noticed anything like that again. It was really bizarre, and I still don't have answers.